Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. I am Annie Dean, and I am the head of Team Anywhere. And I'm joined today by one of my favorite collaborators in the distributed work research space, and that is Nick Bloom from Stanford University. Want to say hello, Nick?
Yeah, hi, hey, thanks for having me on, Annie.
Thrilled to have you here. So, context, why are we here? In 2020, Atlassian went all in on distributed work, meaning that Atlassians can choose where they work from every single day. Last week, we published our research report called Lessons Learned, 1,000 Days of Distributed Work at Atlassian. And we wanted to equip all of you to take advantage of the things that we had learned along the way. That said, we of course haven't figured everything out at all, which is why I'm so excited to be joined today by Professor Nick Bloom, who has been researching remote work for over 2 decades. Welcome, Nick.
Thanks.
Nick, I'm going to ask some spicy questions, things that you and I are both really interested in, we've talked about before, and excited to let everyone in on kind of the conversation that we're always having. One thing that I think is really interesting is that Atlassians have the option to work from where they choose every single day, and it's working for us. So we have seen no dips in productivity. Our candidate accept rate has gone up by 20%. 90% of Atlassians are saying that this flexibility allows them to perform their roles in their best possible way. And so in other words, it seems like there's a lot of business benefits to implementing distributed work. And it's just a more human way to work. It's something that I personally really benefit from and enjoy every day. So, you're talking to executives all the time. You're out there. Given what we're both learning, and I know you're seeing some of the, benefits that we've observed at a broader scale and across, different data sets, why are CEOs so resistant to offering flexibility to their employees?
Great question. So we both love work from home. I'm actually at home. In fact, I'm in the spare bedroom. There's like a bed. This isn't the most professional. It looks great. This is about the only angle I can get rid of this big bed. I think there's kind of two main ways to think about it. One is that companies, there are very different industries. So Atlassian is in tech, you're super successful. It works there. Many tech firms tend to be quite remote focused. Yeah. There are other industries, like I talked to a bunch of people in manufacturing, food services. I was at an event in Las Vegas about a month ago, the whole, thousands of food services folks. So they say, look, frontline, think if you're serving tacos or burgers, you have to go in, and that kind of filters up. It's worth thinking about for big organizations. There's definitely not one size fits all. So I think of Stanford. In Stanford, if you're doing, cleaning, security, transport, you have to be in person. But if you're, say, IT support, a bunch of that can be done fully remotely. So it's not like, you should think about kind of area by area, or makes sense. So one thing is there are just genuine differences. The other angle is I think it's really hard for CEOs, and some of them I think are genuinely making mistakes. While they're making mistakes, This is a big change. It's completely new. And these are people whose entire lives are like very focused on the office and work. So the classic CEO, super successful, done amazingly well, got to the top of the organization, but very work focused. So, they love work. They have, typically millions, maybe tens of millions of dollars in their businesses. When they go into work, everyone laughs at their jokes. They're the CEO. Kind of, they're just more work focused than the typical person. And they tend to maybe be a little bit older. They've spent more time there. And I think it's very easy for them to think the office is where it's at. And the answer is kind of like, well, maybe for you, but for the typical employee, that's not so true.
That's really interesting to think about, and something that we think a lot about, where often we observe that executives are making this decision based on gut instinct or a reflection of what has worked for them in the past, which is something I absolutely empathize with. In the macro environment that we're facing, making strong business decisions and building efficient choices is obviously paramount for every CEO. But what I love about working with our founders is that they really emphasize data-driven decision-making. And while, I think one of the things that we saw in our Fortune 500 research is that when asked, executives are all saying, to the level of 99% of them are saying, we're headed to a world that's more distributed, not less. Yeah. And so it surprises me that it's still so difficult for executives to make this decision and embrace distributed work at scale. And I think often it comes down to the fact that they don't have good data to make arguments that help wrestle with or overcome their personal experiences and gut instincts. And that's something I'm really proud of in the report that we put out, because I think it does offer some data in different, areas that can help businesses build metrics that can be influential to their C-suite.
Totally. The other thing I try to persuade people is that you should care more about profitability than productivity. So it sounds an odd thing to say, but profits and growth is ultimately what businesses are about. In fact, I had, a very senior person, a big public listed company, come talk to my Stanford undergrads yesterday, talking about, he's out here for a board meeting and explaining about stock price, and it's basically profits and growth rates, the two things you care about. Now, why do I raise that? Often fully remote can get beaten up on the sense of productivity, and we can debate, the positives and negatives. But what gets ignored is there's a couple of big ticks in its box, which is you save an office space, which maybe is obvious, but the less obvious one often is you can hire in a much broader radius. And so people often think about fully remote with the existing stock of employees, but the point to note is if you're fully remote, suddenly you can hire nationally or even internationally in your pool of employees. For the same number of dollars, you can maybe get someone, twice as good. And so I think often the metrics are wrong. It's like, I totally agree on data, and Atlassian's done a great job on that. And also what the firms care about, firms ultimately care about profits.
Well, we needed the economist in the chat to say, profitability over productivity. I really like that. And I'm definitely going to be stealing that from you in the future. So just wait until you get my follow-up email for more information. And, I love that too, the idea of talent. We think about the opportunity for diversified talent access on a time zone basis, where you can go north to south and have, a much wider candidate pool across a much wider talent access, and with many different kind of labor factors that you can acquire with very little friction to your business. So something that I think is really important to chat about. Okay, so we just did talk about productivity, and this tends to be the heart of conversation. And one of the key objections that the press and executives tend to bring to the table when we say, hey, this is so obvious, why are you not doing this? And they say, well, our people can't be productive. And of course, what we've learned at Atlassian is that we've looked at how we work, too many meetings, unclear goals, the inability to kind of work effectively cross-functionally, not having enough focus time are really the key blockers to productivity in our kind of traditional modern work environment. But, executives tend to think that the answer is just bringing people back into the office with return to office mandates. So my prediction is that, this is going to be the year 2024 where executives recognize that return to office mandates are not actually impacting those productivity issues. What do you think? Am I right or am I wrong?
So I think, again, it depends on the type of business. So most companies are ending up in some kind of hybrid middle ground. So I can see it both ways. And it depends, to be honest, on who the employees are. It's funny, yesterday, thinking of my Stanford undergrads, they mostly, these are folks in their late teens, early 20s that are about to start work. These are mostly seniors. And they were all view is, look, I want to be in 3-4 days a week. So I want to learn and, I want to scale up and, improve my skills. By the time I'm maybe 30, I have like little kids or something. And at that point, I have a bit more money. I maybe move further out and go to a more remote setup. So my sense is, if you're, hybrid is going to be common. But again, there is not one size fits all. Just to take Stanford, we have almost 20,000 employees. Probably about 5,000 are in person because they have to do their jobs that way. There's about another 3 that are fully remote, and the rest are hybrid. So I think if you're going to, our return to office mandates for 5 days a week, I think makes no sense. For someone that can work from home, for sure, Friday is a no-brainer. To be honest, it pisses people off a lot, calling them in on Friday when it doesn't improve productivity. Mostly I see Mondays are work from home. So I'd say the standard setup is some kind of hybrid thing where maybe you're in 2-3 days a week. Some parts of teams are remote. Atlassian's done very well. I know you guys meet up on a regular basis.
Right.
So remote does not mean never meet. It means, when you survey companies, about 80% say, look, if we're remote, what we're doing is still meeting up, in person once every 4 to 6 weeks. So I think you're right. The return to office mandate definitely stalled out. We see very clearly in the data. I like to joke there's a tombstone that says RTO, and it's dated December 2022. In the data, in the sway data, December 2022 and December 2023 are totally identical. It actually,
that's interesting.
And the Castle data, all of them are flat over the year of 2023. So yes, there are companies in the news about saying they're all going back and the media all jumps on that. There are just as many other companies that are saying we're going to save a bunch of office space. Actually, it's cheaper to have people, remote or more hybrid, and so with unscaling. And net, they're about averaging out to mean, yes, your view that the RTO is over, it's over. And actually, I kind of feel like it was it died maybe about a year ago at this point.
That's so interesting, because it's certainly in public consciousness, it is not dead yet. I think
that's the bias in the media. The issue in the media, actually, I've seen this just going back to 2020. The media is all full of stories about X, Mark Zuckerberg is going to let people work from home, and everyone's really excited. Now in 2023, the media is much more focused on companies forcing RTO, and that generates clicks and outrage and excitement, and it flies around. And so journalists, you and I both talk to a lot of journalists, and I understand, they're incentivized to write stories that people read and circulate, but that tends to be, so everyone listening, please click on stories that say everyone's going to stay remote forever, and then that will generate incentive.
Yeah, we talk about this all the time, and my favorite, I'll just make a quick plug for those who are listening, because I love a quick myth bust. But there was a popular article that continued to be circulated on remote promotion rates, and it talked about the 31% difference between promotion rates among remote and in-office employees. And really the difference was 1.7% overall, which could be a statistical error. So again, for those of you invested in the future of work, click on the right articles and have a sense of skepticism and scrutiny when we read how research papers are presented to the popular media. But I digress. Question.
I was going to say, on that, I have a paper that hopefully is about to come out in Nature. It's kind of in the final stages.
Really? Oh, you're such a celebrity, Nick.
No, I have nothing. Yeah, I've not published in Nature before. It'd be fantastic to get it out. But we do a big randomized control trial, in fact, on a tech company, trip.com, and take 1,600 people and you randomize them whether they're in the office 3 days a week versus 5. And what you find is absolutely no effect on performance whatsoever. Up to 24 months later, nothing. Promotions, lines of code written, performance reviews, nothing, just on anything at all. And secondly, absolutely no effect on promotions. So, the company looks at the data. What you do see, the only thing you really see is employees are massively happier being allowed to work from home 2 days a week, and quit rates drop a third. And the company looks at it and goes, this is obviously massively profitable, because it's really expensive to have someone quit, because you've got to pay to rehire them and get up to speed for a new employee. And so they estimate, saving them tens of millions of dollars to have for a big company to have hybrid for their professionals. And so that was and this thing will come up. I'm totally aligned that we should be focusing on kind of high quality, well thought out research rather than clickbaity surveys whereby you can torture any survey to get any answer you want just about.
Well, I can't wait to read this study, and I'm just over here taking notes. Like I said, okay, but let's talk about something else. So you remember when we were in the pandemic and everyone was like, Zoom happy hours, let's all like have Zoom happy hours and that will solve all of our problems. And then, you got to 2021 and you were like, I'm never going to have a Zoom happy hour again. So to me, hybrid work is the Zoom happy hour of 2022. And what I mean by that is that I think there's this assumption that as we design an opportunity to make distributed work happen at scale, that we are making an unchallenged assumption that office attendance needs to be mandated in any format. I think that the ideal, personally, as a person who institutes this at Atlassian, but personally as an expert and thought leader who's observing this space, I think that the answer is to allow people to choose where they work from every day, and to create great office experiences and allow people to come to the office when it makes sense. And then also to make sure that teams connect in high quality in-person experiences from time to time. But, you have often been a proponent of well-organized hybrid programs that encourage mandated office attendance from time to time. So I'm wondering from you, is voluntary office attendance a possibility? Why are we still so focused on mandatory office attendance? And I'll offer that I think one of the misunderstandings is that attending the office is a management principle or has a management outcome. I would say that we need to work harder to challenge ourselves to design management principles that work in a distributed setting, since nearly all work happens online. What do you think?
So sure, again, this varies a lot. Again, for Atlassian and for a number of companies, it may work very well having fully remote. Mostly the reason that companies are in favor of hybrid and mandating is why would say you want to come into the office? One of the things is you do is you get your own work done. The other thing is you mentor and provide training and feedback to other people. And so often what I hear from managers is they say, look, I've got this real problem. The juniors, they want to come in 3-4 days a week. They want to focus on their career. They want to get learning. But the middle and senior managers don't want to do that. The problem is somebody's got to mentor the lower levels. And they don't, the middle and senior managers don't show up. The problem is the folks in their 20s that are losing out. The other thing you hear is that people that come in, they say, look, there's 8 of us in a team. 7 of us came in, but 1 person stayed at home. It was really difficult because now all of the meetings, including X, have to be on Zoom. We can't take it in the canteen. We can't have it in informal matter. And sometimes they say, well, maybe we just have meetings without them because it's a lot easier. And then that's a really problematic situation. So there are a lot of, there's other frictions. For example, I know what's going on in Zoom. I actually had lunch with Eric Yuan and was asking him about, the various policies there. Another problem is this sense of inequity, that if you are coming in every day and someone else isn't. So I think where we're going to settle out is a mix of different policies across companies. Again, much like Stanford's an enormous organization. For some, it makes sense to be fully in person, some hybrid. Generally, for hybrid, the reason people value being in office is see their colleagues. So it makes sense to coordinate. That isn't that radical. So if you go back to 2019, we're working 50-hour weeks. We coordinated at 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. pretty much Monday to Friday. So no one's allowed to work weekends and evenings. So I think if we do come into the office now, it makes sense to coordinate. How much choice you have? I mean, it's a very complicated thing because, for example, one way to get around it is to, like when I was at McKinsey years ago, people were evaluating what's called developing talent, like how much you mentor people below you. If that's very strongly built into performance reviews, maybe you don't need to mandate office attendance because people naturally do it. In a sense, that's the first best. You say, Annie, part of your role is mentoring people below you. If you, in an organization where there's lots of people coming in every day, you're going to, struggle to do that, and you'll self-decide it without being mandated. But often companies don't have that. They have kind of rudimentary. So I think a lot of this, this is maybe the final thing we get time to talk about, the importance of HR. But a lot of it comes back to, we have kind of sub-adequate performance review and HR systems, which forces very clunky fix-its, which is mandates. Whereas if we had great HR systems and performance reviews, we could step back and say, we're going to give you appropriate rewards. You now make the choice.
Yeah. And let's get there in a minute, because I think that's such an important part of this. The idea that by enabling people's choice, we don't want to impact business, right? So we want to set up our business in a really thoughtful way to get the outcomes that we need, including strong performance awareness and reviews. But just to respond to a couple of things that you said, the idea of kind of the 6 people are in person and the 7th person doesn't show up. And so what do we do? At Atlassian, we've actually always had a rule that was popularized by a company that we acquired and is now a key part of our product suite called Trello. And they normalize the idea that meetings happen in a virtual setting. They happen online. So everybody joins from their own kind of Zoom setting. And I find that those meetings are a lot more effective because they can be supported by documentation and technology and other tooling that augment our capabilities in that meeting, including now the opportunities to utilize things like AI, meeting recaptures, recordings that can be shared with others in a much more efficient way than we could have done even a year ago. So we see, and yet if there needs to be an in-person setting where we need to turn off the timers and just be together and be super creative, that's something that we really create the space for. And then all of those 7 people would be required attendees. It wouldn't be something casual, we'd really be focused on getting the best outcome of those people being together. There was something else that you mentioned. I think it was about equity, but it's flown out of my mind. So let's instead.
I think we're aligned. This is a moving process. So technology is improving. The other thing is management. I mean, we've had probably the biggest
that's what I want to talk to you about. Yeah.
US, companies since maybe World War II. But World War II is amazing as an economist. You saw an enormous increase in female labor force participation because men went off to fight. Women came into factories and everyone realized, lo and behold, they're just as good as men, and things radically changed. We have that again in 2020. And it's again another enormous change for the good. But it takes a while. If you look back what happened it took 20 years for the labor markets to sort themselves out. So I think management needs to change and improve. And you're absolutely right that if you can manage this properly, it's much easier to operate like this. It's just a lot of firms still have their playbook from 2019 and they're struggling to update.
I was advising C-suite of Fortune 500 companies in 2019. And one of my fun facts is that at the time, they did not have video conferencing as a default in most of their calendaring systems. So you couldn't just create a meeting and make video conferencing happen. So, that's so small, but it's crazy to think of where we were. And the last thing I wanted to react to what you shared is early career. So one of the things that we've seen is that it's in the report, our early career employees tend to favor the office more than any other cohort. And it's because of the life stage, story that you were telling before, where, you're living in a small New York apartment with a bunch of roommates, you're not going to have the best work environment. And also you want to go and make some friends. So we're seeing that as well. And what we're finding is that we want to be really thoughtful about what that cohort needs to learn from a development perspective. And also to make sure that there's no friction for that cohort to be able to ask questions of managers. And we're architecting those processes digitally. But what we know the office can offer this group is just the opportunity to kind of have peer learning, be in a corporate environment. And those things are really important, but not important enough to force us to change behavior about senior leaders or mandate people to come into the office. And that's been an interesting learning for us. Basically, the outcomes that we want to architect, we can architect through digital means. And I think that's an important insight. Okay, last question for you though. And this is something that I think about all the time. So I've now done this work of taking a company and transforming it into a future-oriented, flexible-first culture and way of operating in 4 different settings, 3 of them at large enterprises. And the work is really hard to do because finding the people who have the, transformation skill set and, constantly changing things and getting the alignment to get strategies adopted when these questions are really difficult and impact everyone is so hard. So what are you learning about the role of HR and leadership in this space and where we need to get to, or what insights you have about how that vertical is changing to meet the needs of our time?
Great. So when we talked about it offline, so just to be clear, HR is clearly becoming much more important. So why don't I just give you a very nerdy fact-based explanation of it? So I have a data set that has who are the top 5 paid executives in all of the S&P 1,500 companies. So we're looking at the largest 1,500, but they're publicly listed companies in the US. We have that data going back to 1993. So we have 30 years of data. What you see is you go back to the beginning of the 90s, none of them are in HR. There's basically no top 5 paid execs in HR. If you look at that over time, it's just rising, really taking off. Now it's hit 15% and really sharply increasing. When I've talked to, you and, many other folks in HR, what they've said is when you look back often 30, 40, 50 years, it's a lot of kind of compliance, payroll, benefits, et cetera. Now it's become a central position in the company. Things like, work from home policies, COVID policies, DI policies, a lot of these things feed into real estate, they feed into strategy. Like we've just been talking about, you notice that younger folks have a somewhat higher preference to come into the office than say folks in their 30s and 40s. What products you make depends on the age of your employees. Like if you're making, TikTok apps, then you probably want people in their 20s. If you're making stuff, aimed at cruises, you maybe want, you can imagine. So all of this stuff comes back to HR. And so it just looks like it is the age of HR and it's really taking off. The other interesting thing, by the way, is the title is shifting a bit. So we're seeing way more chiefs. So then, there were nobody called chief, but they were back in the 90s. It was a director or a VP. Now it's chiefs. A lot of it is rather than CHR is CPO, chief person, people officer. But those two as roles are really taking off. That's a massive change.
I love it. I was really excited when you first told me about this study, and I hope it's something that many of you who might be listening in the HR vertical at your company feel inspired by, because I think it really speaks to the credibility and velocity of this as a career path.
Yeah, pay is going up too, by the way, Annie. Yeah, I mean, pay is lower. It was 40% of other non-CEO directors at the beginning. It's now 6%. So it's still below, but it's rapidly rising, which is another indicator that it's, not only the more of the HR directors, but they're also getting paid increasingly more.
Awesome. Well, Nick, it has been an absolute pleasure. I have multiple things written in my notebook to follow up with you on, and I will be picking your brain. And for all of you in the audience, as I pick Nick's brain, I'll make sure to make it public. So don't worry. Thank you all so much for joining us. It's been an absolute pleasure. We've been thrilled to be able to publish our 1,000 Days of Distributed report. I hope you'll give it a read. I know the link is in the LinkedIn comments. And we look forward to staying connected. Thanks, Nick.
Annie, it's always fantastic catching up.